lounge back here for a little bit just to get some more information. All right, Glenn, you did so good yesterday. You did exceptionally well. I hope that made all of us feel a little guilty that we're not doing all we can be doing. And we need to get after it. So let's pray for Glenn, and then you can take off. You can start, not take off. Heavenly Father, thank you for being the only one who can. Help us to depend on you, but help us to work for you. Be with Glenn as he speaks to us this morning and just gives us some great ideas. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for loving us. In Jesus' name, amen. You be seated.
Good morning. This is going to be part 2, and I promise you that this is better than yesterday. Yesterday was foundational and informational. Today is actionable, things that we should be doing. So I want to start this session and move us beyond inspiration into strategy that actually works on the ground. And I want to start off by saying this is more than just planting more churches. Okay? It's about planting churches that can be supported, that can be strengthened, and it can be sustained after launch. What we're going to talk about is a model that helps us to refine our sending strategies. This aligns with our theology. It aligns with geography and leadership development in a unified approach. So this part 2 actually builds on the idea that proximity is not a limitation, it's a multiplier. Okay, it's not a limiting factor. Planting in proximity to the sponsoring church. This is not a limitation, but it's a multiplier. And if we can rethink how we send, where we send, and how we support after sending, we can dramatically increase not just the number of plants, but the health and survivability of those plants. Remember yesterday, one of the stats that I showed you was that a healthy church, if they're not self-supported between years 3 and 5, they stand a chance of never being self-supportive or never being strengthened, never growing past 30 to 50 members. So we need to put more emphasis on the preparations before we begin. I gave you an illustration yesterday that a young medical student, first-year medical student, desires to be a brain surgeon, desires to help people, feels that they are led by God into that medical field. Would you allow that young medical student full of desire to operate on you or your loved ones? You would say, nope, takes more than desire. They need an education. They need experience. We're not turning them loose no matter how much desire they have. I want you to apply that same scenario to the mission field. And what we've been doing, what we're used to doing, what we've always done is an individual with a great deal of desire to go on the mission field is normally sent to the mission field with nothing but desires. And that's why we're in the state we're in now. And so we must do things differently or we will keep getting the same results that we're getting today. And so this is not the model, this is a model. The proximity model is a model, not the model. Everything we discussed today flows out of one central conviction. Churches should plant where they can both reach and reinforce. Anybody wants a copy of my notes and the slides, I'll get them to you. Okay? Here's the main claim. The central claim of the entire training session is this. The best field is not just growing, but it's reachable and supportable. Okay? There's a lot of places that we can grow a church. But can you give it adequate support after you've done that? Okay? For too long, church planting has prioritized visible growth, population increase, new housing, okay? expanding cities without asking the second question, can we actually sustain a work if we start it there? The research proves to us that if you rush into a very fertile field but you don't have a strategy for supporting that plant, it's going to fail. Okay? Just because it's the right place to plant doesn't mean you're the right church to plant, that you've got the right church planter, or you've got the right strategy. Okay? So what we're arguing instead is that strategic church planting must include the reinforcement capabilities. Okay? So Texas church planting should prioritize this: visible growth corridors. When I say a growth corridor, it's a phrase that I'm going to use today. Growth corridors are places where there is growth and expansion happening. I'm going to show you some things that maybe you've never seen before today. Okay? Not from the Scriptures, but from how the state of Texas is growing. I've been researching this for about 5 years now. Visible growth corridors, accessibility transportation routes, family settlement zones. Okay? I'm going to show you some examples, and I've got other slides that I don't have time to show you, that I've actually went and done the research, sat down with planning and zoning committees in these 3 towns, and they actually have a map. In one of these cities, there's a planned 1,100 rooftop subdivision, 11,000 homes. In the same city on the east side, there's 350 homes going in here. In the next 5 years, this city is expected to quadruple the number of homes presently there. If we're to be good stewards, right? We know that Jesus gave the good stewards of what we have. That means that we should be strategic where we're planting. Because when we plant healthy churches in growth corridors, within we can reach, when you build that kind of a church, that church now can be reproduced and help other churches. You see what I'm saying? We got to have a strong support system if we're going to grow the total number of churches. And so the best field is not only growing, but it is reachable by the sending church. Reachable. That's why I say 1 hour. Within 1 hour driving distance of the church. And it is supportable. This is almost too small for you to see. When we talk about Texas specifically, we're talking about Texas is one of the most dynamic growth environments in North America. You can put Florida right next to it. Okay? But growth alone does not equal opportunity. Growth alone does not equal that. So that means our growth, aligned growth equals opportunity. This is why we introduced what I'm calling the proximity embedded model. Okay? It's a refined strategy, and the core idea here is this, and you can barely tell from this example. Can you see the dark blue triangle on here? Okay? This is called the growth triangle of Texas. Okay? I gave it that name because I built the slide, so I get to name it. Okay? If you build one, you name it what you want to call it. But this growth triangle is the fastest growing area of Texas. Okay? So if you imagine this state right here, if you were to draw a line a little diagonal like this, the north and west side of Texas is growing at about 17%. That is huge, y'all. 17% growth. That's huge. But the east and south, 39% growth. 39% growth. Where is the biggest return for our buck? Where's our biggest investment? It should be in the east and the south area. That doesn't mean you don't plant churches anywhere else, but if you as a church can only invest so much money, if you can only invest so much time and strategy, where will you see the biggest return? In the east and the south. And if you look at that growth triangle, that goes a long way. So the core idea here is that the planter in this system is the church planter, your missionary, is not developed in isolation and then sent to some distant location. Okay? We do a little something called MTM here. Other denominations have their own version of it. But what we do currently is we send them to seminary, then we send them to MTM, and then we send them on to the field. And I think we can do just a little better. We can include every bit of those things. But the best model, in my opinion, is that we take that church planter and we embed them in the sending church 9 months to a year. So their theology is firmed. Their foundations are finalized. Then they see the strategy of that healthy church. See why you need a healthy church to do the sending? Because an unhealthy church that's not primed for evangelism and discipleship, and if they're not growing, how can they train and know when their church plant isn't going in the right direction? If they themselves are unhealthy, they can't recognize unhealthy in their mission plant. That's why healthy churches should be sending out church planters. So the embedded proximity model says you take your church planter, you embed them in the sending church where they learn healthy church things. They're on staff. They learn every facet of ministry. Not only do they learn it academically, but strategically they are implementing it and they're doing it. They're part of it. They're going to do it so that when they do go onto the field, they know what a healthy church looks like. They know what healthy ministries looks like because they've been part of it. It's easier to replicate that which you have done, not just academically learned in a classroom. Does that make sense? Okay. The planter is not developed in isolation, formed inside the church, shaped by its doctrines, its systems, and its leadership culture. So you've got to be a healthy church doctrinally. You've got to be a healthy church that has good systems. Okay? How do you operate? You've got to have good systems. They've got to be tried. And if a healthy church is doing it, then they might make minor adjustments to their strategies based on culture, etc. But they know what they're doing. And they also need to be mature in their operational support. So in other words, they're sound doctrinally, they're sound with their systems and the leadership culture, and then you take that individual and the church supporting that planter goes into a field. I said it yesterday, I'll say it again. Too many times, a young man, a man with a desire is all it takes to qualify as a missionary nowadays. And so they don't understand the culture they're going into. Making a survey trip into the field, a survey trip is not going to cut it anymore. They need to go and spend time in that culture. The culture of North Texas is very different than the culture in South Texas. I don't know if y'all have ever been to South Texas. It's a little different down south than here. And then they're a little weirder in West Texas than we are in South Texas compared to you North Texas people. But you don't get that with a weekend trip. You get that by spending time there, learning the people. Because if you're going to reach the people of that area, you must understand the culture of those people. What makes them tick? What do they enjoy? What saddens them? What gives them anxiety? You have to understand the culture before you go. We understand this in the foreign mission field, right? But we don't apply that same standard to the mission field in Texas. We have multiple cultures just within the state of Texas itself. So the core idea here is that this is done, and then they are close enough, the church plant is close enough for ongoing relational and operational support. This is not just sending, this is sending with structure, proximity, and sustainability. Too many times, I'm generalizing, what happens many times is a man with a passion for an area is sent to that area. Once a month, he gets a check from the church, and then he sends a report back to the church. And that's their line of communication. That's not sustainability. Where does that report go? On the bulletin board in the fellowship hall next to the men's room, right? And if it's a really hardcore church, they may read the report on business meeting Sunday when people stay away in droves. But if you're close enough where you have families committed 3 to 6 month duration of going onto the field with that missionary. They already know him. They've trained with him. They love him. They call him family. And now people with skills in ministry that are already doing ministry at the sponsoring church, they're already in those very ministries. Greeting, hospitality, children's ministry, security, I'll just name all the ministries, right? They're already doing it. He's already done it with them in his training. Now when they go on the field, he has a support system that comes with him. Not prayers and dreams. He's got a support system. He's got living, breathing bodies there that are going to help him in the first year to 2 years. And then as he starts to train leaders, they're close enough that, let's say there's a woman who says, I feel the Lord leading me to lead in the children's ministry of the church. Great. She comes back to the sponsoring church and does some training. She spends time at that bigger, healthier church, and she sees that ministry done in detail where she can learn on the field. And then she goes back to that church, and then she knows everything the church planner knows. Church planner can't be in here and in children's church at the same time. So do you see how this proximity model actually makes a little more sense? And so what I want you to see from this is Texas added 391,000 people last year. 391 people moved to our state. Okay? Population is now 31.7 million. And the growth concentration in these major areas, you can't see it, but you see the blue, but you also see the bright white spots. Those are the concentration of the most growth in those corridors. So when you look at I-30 as a growth corridor, and it is a major, I call it the spine, because the spine supports everything in the human body, and everything goes out peripherally from the spine. I call that the spine of Texas, because everything is based off that, and all these other growth corridors grow that way also. Okay. The next thing I want to show you would be this. Church planting is also a geographical question. Okay. Population, we know that's going to develop roads, jobs, schools, and housing. And if you were to look at a map of any state, you look at where the major corridors are, and there you're going to see business growth, you're going to see housing for the workers, you're going to see restaurants and all the support things, hospitals, schools, etc. Growth is not evenly distributed, okay? Never has been. Strategy should align with the actual movement patterns. That means if you're trying to plant strategically on a growth corridor, you need to find where it's growing, where it's at, and then plant in proximity to that area. And I'm not saying you don't plant in small towns, because right now, Seguin, Texas, anybody ever heard of Seguin, Texas? Sleepy little town, right? Third fastest growing city in America. But if you look at the population, it says it's just a few thousand people. 5 times that many people live outside the city limits. You know why? Because I'm blessed where I live in South Texas, because people in my area that live there in Lockhart and Luling and Seguin, we call them bedroom communities. They live there, but they drive 45 minutes to Austin and or the San Antonio area. And as Austin and San Antonio, I'll do it this way for you. As Austin and San Antonio are growing east, then they don't drive as far. And so these places are growing like a weed. I hesitate to say this, but I liken it to gambling. You put your chips down where the greatest return can be found. You bet on it. You invest in that. And if we look at these major growth corridors, we'll look at them in more detail. But what it means is that strategy must align with the actual human movement patterns. Human movement patterns, that means that when a corridor is being developed, the first thing that comes in is the road system. And then it will be revived. Road construction, aren't we sick of it, right? But you look at these highways, they keep making them bigger and wider. Why? Because they're going to be expanding there. So you could buy 5 acres of pasture for $200,000. That in 5 years, it's worth $1 million an acre. And guess what? You've bought right next to a subdivision of 500 homes. You don't have to venture any further than that to start a church. You think you can build a church with 500 homes? Especially if you're one of the first people there. So we've got accessibility, we've got movement, and we've got reinforced interest. Communities are being built there. Okay? Why Texas requires corridor thinking. Texas does not grow in isolated pockets. It grows in corridors. Okay? These corridors are shaped by metro expansion, commuter flow, infrastructure development, and affordability shifts that push families outward to the urban areas. What is urban today will be residential tomorrow. And if we think about that and invest in that way, but more importantly, we see that the convergence of rooftops and roads, we call it rooftops and roads, rooftops, homes. Homes and roads. And you see the accelerated ministry potential when you start seeing developments. In one city alone, within 5 years, they're adding 3,900 homes. 3,900 homes. What comes with every expansion like that? Roads, bridges, construction, people, jobs, hospitals, schools, and then that attracts all those people, not just the residents, but part of the people it attracts are all of the people that work in all those industries and trades. The support system. So now we even see further growth. And so corridor thinking allows us to move from random placement to predictive strategy in planting churches, being very predictive in our strategy. So instead of asking where should we plant, we begin to ask where is growth already forming in a way we can access and support it. So then we need healthy churches that are within an hour of these growth corridors. I'll show you more in detail. To be ready. To have their strategies and their systems and their leadership developed so that they can send out a church plant an hour away. And what I think is going to happen is you will have churches of 100, 200, and 300 that start churches that within 10 years are 500 or 1,000 in strength. Wouldn't it be great if the church plant became 3 to 5 times the size of the sending church? Wouldn't that be fabulous? Didn't we see that in the Bible where they started here and went there, but then they had to come back and help support the mothership? Nothing wrong with that at all, right? So let's look at some overgrow here. So Texas growth is shaped by metro expansion, computer movement, suburban development, transportation infrastructure. You don't have to be a genius to look at some of the Google Maps, time lapse it. What did this area look like 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago? Okay. Let's look at the overview here. As we walk through these different types of opportunities within Texas, each one of us gives us insight. So as we look through lens, I want you to look at these growth corridors. Just think about it this way. Not is this growing, we know it is, but can we reinforce it? You never invest in an area you can't reinforce. Okay? So if you look at this graphic right here, when we see this area here, these are the 4 that I want to touch on this morning because I don't have time to deal with the other 3. The I-35, we call it the Mega Corridor, the Seguin Expansion Corridor, Lockhart-Bastrop Corridor, and the Floresville Corridor. All of these areas represent the major growth corridors in Texas. And there's actually 2 that are closer to you here. Okay? But I don't live here, and I'm not trying to start a church here. So selfishly, I designed this around what we're doing and where we're going. Okay? As we move into these corridors, understand that what we're looking at is not random. It is strategically missional opportunities shaped by movement, the human movement patterns. Where are people going? Where are they going to be? You know, have you ever heard on the radio that this stock went up 10 times? Too late to invest then, isn't it? Should have got in on the ground floor. We need to be strategic about where we plant, how we plant, and when we plant. That's why I say that a great potential would be find yourself one of these corridors, buy some land outside of it, then move back into that city or that region and do pop-up church that we're in a rented location, grow the congregation, you've already got the land, grow the congregation to where they then, with minimal support, can build their phase 1 building on that property. Then they move into their property, and then they can expand even greater. This is not build it and they will come. This is being strategic about the growth. Because today the land can be had for $100,000 an acre. In 5 years it will cost you $1 million an acre. If you can get it, if the developers haven't already snatched up 50, 60 acre plots at a time because they know of the future expansion. Okay? And all of this you can find with a little hard work and going in, meeting city officials, taking them to lunch, meeting somebody in the planning and zoning committee, finding out where they're going to incorporate, how they're going to enlarge the cities and stuff. If you think of this, Acts chapter 1, verse 8, Jesus established a geographic progression, didn't He? Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Jesus didn't start with Samaria. What did He start with? That which was closest to Him. And you can see the patterns of the Apostle Paul. He started close and then he expanded. And then he had to come back and revisit, re-strengthen, and to set up leaders. Ed Stetzer, great guy. He says, emphasizing that mission strategy must be contextual and incarnational, not abstract. In other words, we don't just plant where we wish people were, we plant where people actually are and where they're going to be. Okay? These corridors represent modern-day equivalents of movement lanes. If anybody know Pastor Kevin Clinton? They initially bought a large plot of land out in the country. And their church is still kind of semi out in the country. They sold one tiny corner of it and paid off the rest of the property, paid off their building, and they're ready to start phase 2 of their building project. That's what I'm talking about. Just being strategic like that. I want you to look at. Let's look at these primary corridors of this study. Will be the I-35 mega corridor, and then Seguin, Lockhart, and Floresville. Let's start with the I-35 mega corridor. This is where it goes. It goes from Austin to San Marcos to New Braunfels, Schertz, and then San Antonio. That is a line kind of diagonal from the center of Texas to a northwest kind of venue going that way. Okay? This is the strongest corridor that has interior growth. Okay, I'll explain that. It's got multiple connected populations. It's got multiple towns. Lockhart used to be a sleepy town only known for the world's best barbecue. Now they're known for their subdivisions, their schools, and their great expansion. Now is the time to go to Lockhart and try to buy land in the west or the northeast. Those are the two areas you could go to where you could expand this. Multiple connected population centers, the strongest corridor for repeated planting opportunities, which means it's not great for just one plant, it's great for multiple plants. And it would be great if two healthy churches, one started here and one started there. Because now you've got two churches working with each other and supporting these two works so that in 3 to 5 years, each plant now starts another one. How often do we right now see a church plant within 3 to 5 years plant another church? We see them showing up at the... We see that they're desperately in need of support at 3 to 5 years. They can't expand. They're trying to survive. That's all I'm going to say because I don't want to give my email out to anybody. All complaints should be directed to Dr. Butler at tbi.edu. Here we go, I-35 corridor. You can see a little better on this one. You can see the growth pattern there of I-35. Like I said, it's going to be linking Austin, San Marcos, New Braunfels, Church, and San Jose. This is the best for churches seeking maximum demographic movement while still reserving something that is repeatable in that area. All that means is it's a great place to go, and you can repeat it multiple times in that area. Okay. Strongest interior growth pattern we have. From a church planting perspective, this matters because it creates multiple visible launch points within a single reinforced system. That means that a sponsoring church with the will and the resources could plant one, and then within 2 to 3 years plant a second, and then in 2 to 3 years plant the third. It can be repeatable. Okay. Tom Rainer, his work in Breakout Churches highlights that sustained growth often occurs when leadership aligns with the environments already experiencing momentum. That's just a nice way of saying, go where they're growing and you can expect better results. Okay? That's why that's why I say that it's least impactful when you go to a small community and the sponsoring church is hundreds and hundreds of miles away and they plant in a small town, so they can't support it, they can't build it up, and so at best will turn out an average church. How big is the average church? Anybody know? Everybody knows, right? What's the average size church? 7,100. That's a little above average. Average is between 50 and 62 people. That's average. So if you go to a church of 50 people, don't be dismayed. You're average. I mean, we live in a day and time when being average is pretty darn good, right? But what if a church of 100 started a church that had the potential within 2 to 3 years to be 150? That's making a maximum investment. So from this perspective, this quarter offers that momentum, but more importantly, it offers repeatable opportunities. Why the EPSM model fits this? It's highly accessible, repeatedly a repeatable support system, multiple launch nodes, multiple locations you could launch from, and then realistic and coaching volunteer reinforcement. When I say it's easily reinforced, I mean from Lifeway Church in Cuero. That's within an hour of where we are. So it would be easy to support them. Reachable growth, rechargeable growth, and it's not just visible, it's reinforceable, okay? If you look at the map, let's look at the I-10, the I-10. The Seguin corridor represents a different kind of opportunity now. It's not the largest or the most visible, but it is highly attainable and strategically positioned, which means, let me translate that for you. You know what it means when you say high risk, high reward? Well, this is not risking so much, but it's got a little bit smaller amount of return. But still, the investment and return in this corridor is still 5 times stronger than just about any mission plant we have other than those in the Houston corridor today, right now. So in other words, this is a little more doable, okay? I-35, Corvette. Seguin, not a Honda Prelude. Maybe a fully dressed Tahoe or something, you know what I'm saying? Okay? It's located along I-10 and Highway 46. Sits within the gravitational pull of San Antonio while maintaining space for early stage development. This is where, in the model that I designed, this is where we start to see the principle of faithful presence within reach. Okay? It's going to take a little longer, but in Luke 10, where Jesus sends out the 72, He sends them into places that they can enter, that they can stay, and they can build relational influence. What should we be doing? We should be going places where we can send, we can build, and we can sustain. There is no place within this corridor that is disconnected from support. Seguin represents a field where presence and reinforcement can realistically coexist, which is critical in the very early stages. Okay? It's a little more risky on the I-35 corridor initially. It's a little safer, and you still have great return here. On the Seguin map, this is a picture of Seguin right now. Third fastest growing city in America. You drive through it today, you think you're in a little country town. What this map shows is, this is the immediacy of it. You know the places that are growing? It's everything you don't see on this picture. That's where all the potential growth is. If you go to your city zoning committee department, you go to city zoning department, and you meet with those who are designing and doing allotments, and they're making all the easements, and they're doing the zoning, which means farmland can be converted into housing stuff. You have developers that have been developing this for years, and they have plans, and they're not top secret plans. You just got to go ask and sit down. You got to get to know somebody. And they'll unroll a map and they'll say, this is what Seguin is going to look like in 5 years. And what you see as the town right now will literally be swallowed in what Seguin will be. You see the benefits of using this method. The other thing about Seguin is it's one of the clearest example of rooftops, traffic patterns, and alignment. Seguin is, you're going to risk the most, capital-wise. It's going to take the biggest investment of money, but it also has the greatest sense of return. Literally, the way I've studied Seguin is, you could literally plant 3 churches almost in the perfect triangle, and they could still exceed membership of 500. Each one. Not a church of 50, 3 churches of 500. That's the way the city is growing. You plant one, then you have name recognition. People know your ministry. They know you're touching the community. You start a second location. Because, unlike in East Texas, in a big city, people don't want to drive more than 20 minutes to church. So if you have one in the south and you build one in the northwest, these people no longer drive across town, and you have a new environment to reach. Does that make sense? So here's why the EPS model fits. It's a clearest example of supportable growth. You can realistically rotate families there from the sponsoring church. It's less than an hour away. Maintain a leadership presence and transfer systems without overextending the sending church. It's close enough that it doesn't stress out the sending church, us. And the benefits are right there. So that means even once the church planter gets on the field, they're still going to spend maybe a day a week back at the sponsoring church. And then we're going to help develop and train all of their new leaders at our church. I mean, I think the example I used yesterday was, if you go to McDonald's in Nacogdoches or you go to McDonald's in Corpus Christi, it's the same menu, it's the same food, expect the same service, the same amount of time to make your burger and fries. So you're going to make what is repeatable. Okay? If your church is a healthy church and you've developed your theology, your systems, and your structure, why not repeat it? Why invent the wheel? Or why leave it to a church planter to come up and reinvent the wheel with all of these things? We call them playbooks, but every ministry at our church has a playbook. This is everything on how this ministry operates. This is why it exists. This is how it's incorporated in Make Heaven Crowded. This is the part they play. This is what they do, how they do it, how they train their people, and how they integrate with every other ministry. That's in a playbook. Every ministry has a playbook. If you train somebody on all the playbooks, you train them in each one of these areas. And then when they go to the field, you send them people that have been trained with the same playbook, and they go to the field with them. That's synergy. That's momentum. The church planter is not reinventing the wheel on how to do ministry. They've already learned it, seen it done successfully, and now they're out looking to replicate it. Let's face it, the Great Commission is evangelism and discipleship. That has never changed and never will. But maybe the culture is a little different from the sending church to the church plant. If you stay within an hour, it's really not. So you're not really doing a deep dive into the culture, but you are identifying with it. In Acts 15:36, Paul says, "Let us return and visit the brothers in every city and see how they are." And that mindset means ongoing process and ongoing access to those churches. Let's look at the next one quickly. Lockhart Bastrop. This is a great one. Southeast and east of Austin, of the Austin Overflow, driven by outward movement from Austin. Austin is growing in all directions, but the least pressure for Austin to grow is east. Austin can't grow much westward, it is. Can't grow north, but it's growing south and east. The eastern direction is growing at the fastest, which is in our path, to our benefit. Okay? It's driven by outward movement from Austin, largely due to the affordability pressures. My son owns a home in Austin that costs $550,000. That if you move to Lockhart, you could build 3 times the house, or build the same house for about $200,000. Simple math, don't even need to take off your shoes. Build a $200,000 house with lower tax rates, lower city taxes, in Austin. Okay? And developers know this, that's why they've been flocking there. So the question is not whether growth will come, it's whether the church will arrive early enough to be planted in that area to matter. When you look at this map, and this is going to be easier when you look at it. When you look at this map, what you're seeing is expansion that is still unfolding. This is not a saturated environment. Seguin is becoming saturated in the planning mode. They haven't planted all these subdivisions, but they're developed. Land is almost locked up in certain areas. But in the Lockhart area, nobody's even found the lock or put a key in it yet. So not as much risk, but you won't grow near as fast as Seguin. But still, I mean, if we had a church growing at 17, if your church grew 17% each year, you'd be on the cover of the Baptist Monitor. So it's nothing to laugh at here. Biblically, this reflects the principle of sowing ahead of the harvest. Like in John chapter 4, verse 35, Jesus said, "Lift up your eyes, see that the fields are white with the harvest." This corridor, Lockhart Bastrop corridor, it requires the kind of vision, seeing not just what is, but what is coming and preparing for it. And a lot of times, this is not how we've approached church planting in the past. Okay? There we go. That's Lockhart again. Easy entry. This is why it fits. I want to make a little progress. I'll do Floresville and then I'll quit. I'll share any of my slides with anybody that wants to see the rest of it. Floresville corridor. This map shows something strategic. Lower competition, strong accessibility and proximity to the sending base in Cuero. Okay? So this is the least investment, but it's still great rate of return. In other words, this is like buying a CD instead of buying a stock. Lower return, but it's very safe. It's a very safe area to go to. Floresville provides an environment where the presence can be maintained without exhausting the sending church. A lot of times, sending churches are exhausted financially. They can't do anything more for the church plant. They're doing all they can financially. And then it doesn't make sense, but a church in Chicago will start a mission in Texas, and a church in Texas will start a mission in Chicago. And then you have just the geographical location that makes it impossible to support that. Even if you're only having to drive 5 hours, 6 hours to your church plant, logistics already in, so you're not sending people from the local church to help out. That you can't do that anymore. And so that's why I wanted to show. That's why I wanted to show you that. This is the state of Texas, not in the shape of Texas, but I've outlined the major growth areas. West Texas, lower growth. highest growth is on the I-35 corridor. And then East Texas, there's also strong growth in this direction if you're in proximity to one of the corridors. Here's some that I didn't put into this, but I have developed these. Temple, Belton, and Killeen. Y'all are going to notice more of these. Y'all are going to recognize these towns. Bryan College Station, North Dallas-Fort Worth, and then the West Northeast Houston expansion. I've done a little more work on the Houston one. I've got basic demographic, psychographic studies and expansion studies on the others. These are worth watching. These would be more important to you. So if your church wanted to start something an hour from you in this area, then I would do the research for you, and I would do this kind of presentation for your elders, your board, or your church family. I just want to finish. Corridors concentrate where church plants are needed the most. It's where there's the most people, the most family, the most infrastructure, and long-term settlement patterns. Okay? This is where neighborhoods are forming, schools are filling, and the rhythms of life are being established. And so, not all growth is strategic growth. Some growth is visible but unreachable. Okay? And just to reiterate this, do you see any objections to this type of plan? I do, but can you recognize any? What would be an objection you would see? What's the biggest obstacle for this? The sending church must be within proximity to one of the corridors. So what must we be doing? This is a great bridge into tomorrow, which is revitalization. We must revitalize the churches within the sending zones of these corridors so that they can become healthy churches, so that they can be a sending church. Because in this model, I don't have time to show you the slide. I got a map of ABA churches in Texas, and when you overlay it on these corridors, we're not there. We're not there. That's why we must take the few churches we have within that area and strengthen them and revitalize them. Anybody got any questions for me? I need to quit. I will show you more privately. I'll stick around about this. I'm going to leave you with this question. We got to plant in a way that allows us to stay long enough to see transformation. There is no reason we have to plant a church, invest in a church plant that in 10 years is less than 50 people. Just because that's been done for the last 30 years doesn't mean that needs to be acceptable today. If the ABA planted 3% of the total number of churches every year, in 20 years, we will not knock out the decline and decay that we already see right now. Think the dinosaurs ever looked around and thought, we might not be here very long? So we must get to work. And we have to do both. We have to plant strategically, within proximity, but we must also revitalize the churches that we have. Which one is more difficult? Planting or revitalization? Definitely is. Okay? It's much easier, and I'm I'm just going to say it. It's easier to plant a new church than it is to revitalize a dying church. You know what happens in a new church? There is no culture, there is no past, there is no good old days. We're not hurting Sister Marge's feelings by taking out that piano that doesn't work. I don't know how many fellowship halls I've been to that have 3 dead pianos in it that they won't get rid of because they've been donated by 3 different families in the last 100 years. We can't get rid of that. The Joneses dedicated that in honor of their mother. Well, let's just move another one to the fellowship hall and get one that works. When you plant a church, you don't have that. When you plant a church, you instill the mentality there. Okay? So if you don't wear a tie and you don't preach from the King James Version and you plant a church, the people that want that will come and visit and politely leave. The people that are attracted to it will stay. That's why it's easier to plant a church than it is to revitalize a church. And we'll talk more about that next week. Any final questions for me? Thank you. Can I do a closing prayer? Father, thank you for the opportunity we've had here today. I pray that this will spark some concern and some excitement in some people, that maybe we look at a new way. maybe other churches will want to join Lifeway in attempting this model and putting it to good work. Father, I pray that you will embolden us, that we will continue to plant churches in areas that need them the most, and that we will strengthen churches that desire it and make wise investments of our time and our resources. Father, bless this student body, their families, and their ministries in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you all.